We started out talking about an inside-out approach from inside, talking about our spiritual relationship. Then we moved into marriage. We talked about that some. We talked about sort of the origin of marriage, the process of marriage, the purpose of marriage. Then we started talking about this concept of love in marriage. And we're going to sort of specialize it. Today I want to talk with you about how to love your wives. Most guys, if you say, I want to teach you how to love your wife, they'll say, hey, I got that, no problem. Well, we'll see. We'll go through that. One thing I wanted, when I started yesterday, I talked with you about the fact, 2 reasons to go through marriage in a missionary training ministry session. One is a refresher course for you, because if you don't have a good marriage, you're not going to have a good ministry. Number 2, you're going to spend a lot of time wherever you are addressing family problems. I did a survey in conjunction with Larry Clements a couple of years ago, and one of the things that really jumped out was this. 70% of pastors within the ABA spend anywhere from 15 to 45% of their time addressing family problems. So you're going to have to address some of these problems. And so this is sort of a refresher course there. So today we're going to talk about, in this session, about loving your wife. Let me start out by showing you what it's not. This is not loving your wife. Because typically when you talk with guys about loving your wife, my wife is to be submissive and I'm to love and lead her. You sort of, not literally, but it sort of takes this flavor to it. So I want to talk with you about what does it mean. First, there's 3 passages of scriptures. I'm going to use Ephesians 5. You could also use Colossians 3, 1 Peter 3, talking about this idea of love and respect. Now, where are your wives? They're in another room. And my wife is talking to your wives about respecting you. If you haven't figured it out now, it's very difficult for you to talk to your wife about respecting you. The best chance you have is for my wife to talk to your wife about that. So you can put your mind at ease and just focus on what we're trying to do. So what do we talk about when we're talking about loving your wife? I want to give you a definition, and then let's talk about what this really means. Husbands, love your wives. If you look at that, the love is agape or agape, loving your wife. And it says, as Christ loved the church. And if you dig down a little bit into that word, it is a love of commitment. It's in the active voice, which means that you're the one to do that. It's talking about in the present tense, which means it's a lifestyle. It's not a one-time event. It's a lifestyle. And then it's in the imperative mood, which means it's not a suggestion. It's a command. So we are to love our wives as Christ loved the church. So it's a love of commitment. It's a love of action. So it's a pattern of behavior that's beneficial to your wife. So, where do we go from there? Let's talk about the application. That's the principle. We're to love our wives as Christ loved the church. What does that look like on the ground? I find this so often when people read the Bible, even if they grasp the principle, it's what does that look like in everyday life? And so that's what we're going to hone in on. What does it really look like to love your wife as Christ loved the church? Well, How did Christ love the church? Number one, He loved the church sacrificially. Husbands, love your wives even as Christ also loved the church and gave Himself for it. So let's look at Christ's example to start out. There's a principle I call the leader-servant principle. And you'll find this if you go over and look in a couple of places in Mark, but in Matthew 20, 25 through 26. Let me just sort of set the stage here. What had happened when Jesus had been talking to the disciples, they'd asked the question, who's going to be the greatest in the kingdom? And then they were arguing about who's going to be the greatest in the kingdom. And so Christ just took a time out. And He got them over there and He said, listen. But Jesus called them unto Him. Like, come here, guys. And said, ye know that the princes of the Gentiles exercise dominion over them, and that they that are great exercise authority upon them, and it shall not be so among you, but whosoever will be great among you, let him be your minister. Now, the whole essence of that can boil down into why is a person put in a place of leadership? Who are they to benefit? The secular view is what the disciples were thinking about. Typically, a leader will be in a position of leadership for his own benefit. I mean, it amazes me when elected officials say, I want to represent you, and when they get into office, they tend to represent themselves. So you're placed in a position of leadership for your wife for her benefit. You are placed in a leadership position for your family, for your kids, for their benefit. That revolutionizes this concept of leadership. I know this works because I've spent 30 years in the corporate world, and that works in the corporate world. I've spent more of the years than that in church world, and it works there. If you understand that you're placed in a position of leadership for the benefit of those you lead, that will change your whole concept of leading. So that's what Christ did. Become a living sacrifice. What does that mean? You remember when Christ washed His disciples' feet? How many times did He do that? I can only find once. And why did He do that? He modeled this concept of a servant leader. And He said, I'm washing your feet. And then at the end of it, He said, I want you to do the same thing for each other. In other words, He not only taught this principle, but He modeled it in being a leader for their benefit. Then, having the mind of Christ. Let this mind be in you, which was also in Christ Jesus, who being in the form of God, thought it not robbery to be equal with God, but made Himself of no reputation, and took upon Him the form of a servant, and was made in the likeness of men, and being found in fashion as a man, He humbled Himself and became obedient unto death, even the death of the cross. So, do you love your wife as Christ loved the church? Makes us pause and think about that. So what would that look like in everyday life? So let's just sort of take and go to this conformance aspect of it. Your headship is what? Why are you put in a position of leadership? For the benefit of your wife. You are set by God to be a channel of blessing for your wife. Now, I had a gentleman in the Sunday school class once took real exception. He said, wait a minute, are you telling me, Larry, that I'm the only way my wife can be blessed? And I said, no, that's not what I'm saying. God can choose to bless your wife any way He chooses. But the preferred way is to bless your wife through you. That's why I say, God, love my wife through me. That's where you get the concept of committed love. The concept of what's best for her. You're to be a blessing for your wife. Her needs and happiness are your priority. I mean, you've heard if mom ain't happy, ain't nobody happy. And that's true to some extent. But God says you are to meet her needs, and you're to put her needs above your own. Your love is not conditioned upon her submission, but is based upon Christ's example. That raises hair on the back of some men's neck. See, this is a command. Do you know why we divide it up between husbands love your wives, wives respect your husband? We used to do this all together. Who do you think took all the notes on husbands love your wife? The wives did. Who do you think took all the notes on wives respect your husband? Husbands did. And about a week after a conference, then the notebooks would come out, and you're supposed to do this, and you're supposed to do that. Guess what? If you look at that command, the command is to us, love your wife as Christ loved the church. The command is for the wife to follow the leadership of her husband. That's directly from God. As I told you, it ain't going to work if you try to tell her that, because that's not your position. And it's not conditioned on whether she follows your leadership. Now, that may seem like, well, what do we do? Well, I'm going to tell you what we do. The best chance you have of your wife respecting you and following your leadership is you love her as Christ loved the church. Now, let's dig a little deeper. You remember the story of Hosea?
Yes, sir. Yeah.
Okay. For those of you that need a refresher, Hosea was a prophet, and God chose to use him to bring Israel back. And as a model of what God was going to show the people, because Israel had strayed away, they had been unfaithful to God, and God says, I'm going to win you back. And he said, Hosea, I want you to go marry a prostitute. Now, I did this session, you'll have to understand, it was South Mississippi. And afterwards, a guy came up and said, you tell me we need to marry prostitutes? I said, no, you missed the point. God told Hosea to marry a prostitute. He bought her, literally bought her, took her out of prostitution, made her his wife, brought her into the home, and you would think, what a guy. Man, she's going to love him, she's going to worship him, she's going to take care of him forever, right? Didn't go that way, did it? What happened? She went back into prostitution. And what would our attitude be? I bought you once. That's it. You deserve what you're getting. But what did God tell Hosea to do? Go buy her back. So do you get the concept here? I mean, if God says, this is the model I want, and your wife overspends her budget this month, and you say, you're just going to have to live with the consequences, and, I'm not going to speak to you for 2 weeks. Measure those two. Not quite the same, right? It's talking about loving and forgiving. Now, another aspect of this is the fact that, do you ever get crosswise with your wife? Does she ever do something that just really honks you off? And what's the attitude we tend to have? Sister, this is your problem, and it's up to you to come to me. Who is to initiate reconciliation in any problem in a marriage? The husband. You're the leader. The Lord hits me between the eyes with this. Sometimes if I get a little irritated, and then the Lord says to me, you're the leader. You're the leader. You set the mood. You set the tone. You're the one to forgive. Now, there may be times when it's all her fault and none of yours. I've never really seen that exactly. But even if that were the truth, look at Hosea. He went and initiated reconciliation. When you were lost, who sought you out? When you get out of fellowship with God, who seeks you out? He seeks you. And so when there is a problem, when there's an alienation in the marriage, when there's some stress or strain in the marriage, we're the ones to initiate the reconciliation because we're the leader. God holds us accountable for that. You give until it hurts, then you keep giving until it feels good. You don't want to hear that. I don't want to hear that. But it's the truth. We are the leader. Now, let's talk about loving her without harshness. In Colossians 3:19, and be not bitter against them. Harshness is a bitter offense to a wife. Why? Because she has given you her hopes, her dreams, her aspirations, her life. And then when we are harsh, that just crushes the spirit. Now, you probably haven't seen this in your wife's face before, but you can say something or do something and you see the countenance change. You see the crushing of the spirit. And sometimes you might have meant to do that, but a lot of times you had no intention of crushing the spirit. Why is that so? Well, the reason that tends to happen is that, we talked about men and women communicate differently. It's also true in this area. We may not mean to be harsh, but the tone of our voice or the volume or even the words that we say, when we have no intention, will crush the spirit. Let me give you an illustration. Came home one Sunday afternoon, right after church, walked through the garage, went through the back door in the kitchen, and my wife said, the disposal is hung up again. And I thought, we've talked about this several times. What you put in it, what you don't put in it. Okay? But I did really well. I'm fine. I didn't say anything. Went in, so I thought, all right, I'll take care of this quickly. So I went out back in the garage and I got a broom with a wooden handle and went back in, put it down in the sink, put it on one of the blades, and going to push it and, bust it loose again. Well, I pushed down too hard and the whole mechanism dropped into the bottom. I thought, oh man, this is going to take all afternoon. So I opened it up, pulled everything out, climbed up under there, and lo and behold, there was a belt, sort of rack and pinion, a band, and you just can loosen it and tighten it with the screw. I thought, hey, this is not going to be so bad. I can just loosen that up, put it back up there, tighten it up, and we're in business. Well, my wife had said, I'll help you. Of course, by that time she was back in the bedroom. And so this is where it went south. I said, babe, would you bring me that screwdriver? Babe didn't hear me. So what's the logical thing to do? You've got several options. You could get out, go get it yourself. You could increase the volume. And so, being rational, it's like, well, she was going to help me, so I'll just increase the volume. So, babe! That didn't work. One more time, really loud, babe! So she came in. I said, would you get that screwdriver out in the garage, the slotted one, and bring it in? Well, she did, and she came back, but you could tell what she wanted to do with that screwdriver. Because I had hollered, I had screamed at her. Now, had I hollered and screamed at her? I mean, think about it. On the job, guys, you know, you need a tool and you holler at some guy. Are you going to say, would you please? You're going to holler louder to get their attention, and what are they going to think about it? Nothing, right? I mean, you can't talk to your wife like you talk to the guys, okay? If you haven't learned that, you need to add that to your toolbox. Because that is a sense of harshness for her. So you have to understand that. Losing through intimidation. Submission cannot be demanded. It's not your duty to lecture your wife, and you have to give your expectations to the Lord. Allow Him to work on her. I was teaching this at Nacogdoches, Texas once, and a guy sitting right on the front row. When I said that, he just nearly came out of the chair. He said, I've told my wife, I've lectured her about she's supposed to follow my leadership. And I said, how's that working for you? He said, well, it's not. I said, well, this is why. Because it's not your duty to lecture your wife. Let God do that. Give your wife freedom. The great smother up, in other words, jealousy, in Song of Solomon, it says it's a sin. It's cruel. Agreement and submission don't come at the expense of respect. So, this idea of giving your wife freedom, what does that mean? That means she needs fellowship with other women. When I got married, I thought, hey, what more could she want? She's got me, and that's all she needs. But I'm telling you, women need fellowship with other women. And you need to facilitate that. If that means keeping the kids and let her go do that, you do that. Now, a caveat in that. Your wife needs fellowship with other godly women. That's important to understand that. Because I've seen situations, it may not be some fellowship that you facilitated. It might be that she's working in a job with a lady working next to her is going through a bitter divorce, and that can rub off because she'll listen to, he did this, he did that, and then you get to thinking, my husband did this, my husband did that, and it can rub off. But what you want is your wife to have fellowship with other godly Christian women. That's important. She needs that. Now, love her with understanding and tenderness. Now, I'm going to unpack 1 Peter chapter 3, verse 7. This verse has a lot to say about our relationship with our wife. Know and understand what makes her tick and what ticks her. I've given up on understand. You just have to know. Because you're not ever going to completely understand. But just know what ticks her. Now, how do you do that? You need to know her hopes, her fears, her aspirations. You need to know her cares, her disappointments, and even her moods. Now, how do you do that? It's pretty simple. She's wired to tell you that. All you have to do is listen. When you think she's just rattling on, she's telling you these things. And do you know what happens if you don't listen? She stops talking. And you think, she's finally run out of words. No. She's not run out of words. What's happened is she has determined you don't care because you're not listening. Let me tell you this. You don't want a wife that doesn't talk. Now, I understand personality differences, and some are more gregarious than others, and some are more withdrawn than others, and maybe they don't speak as much, but I'm telling you, when your wife talks, you better listen. Because that's the only hope you're going to have of knowing all of these things. I ask open-ended questions. I want to know as much as I can about my wife. Because the more I know about her, the more I can love her as Christ loves the church. You're not going to know how to love her as she needs to be loved unless you know these things. And you're not going to know these things unless you listen to her. And when I'm talking about listening, I'm talking about actively listening. I'm talking about face-to-face. I'm talking about eye contact. I'm talking about and at the right times. In other words, don't zone out. Because she knows whether you're listening or not. And if it's situations where it, could be, third down and a foot to go, and we're fixing to score, hopefully. But you can say, "Hey, babe, I really want to listen to what you have to say. Give me 5 minutes," or whatever. And the thing about what we tend to do, Joe illustrated that perfectly. When you're in ministry and you talk to people all day, and you're just zoned out. I mean, like, man, last thing I need is hear some more problems. What you can do is you can have an agreement with your wife. When I come home, give me 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 15 minutes, whatever. Let me transition, readjust, and then I want to hear about your day. Because typically, if she's working, then things have happened during the day. She's going to have a lot more to share with you about what happened in her day than what happened in your day, or what you want to express about your day. So listen, know these things. Your wife needs physical tenderness and contact in non-sexual ways. And when I say this is the typical reaction I get. What? What do you mean she needs physical touch and tenderness in non-sexual ways? Well, let me explain to you. Touching is a basic human need. There's no question about that. It's a primary means of communicating love. And we could talk about the love languages, and that's important. But physical touch is something that they need to enjoy closeness without having to lead to sex. Why is that important? Because this builds feelings of affection. But what happens? When we're dating, particularly when we're newlyweds, okay? We take the time to hold hands, to cuddle, to have the physical touch without it leading to sex. Well, as life goes on and we get busier, what tends to happen? We don't take as much time. We don't make the time to hold hands, to touch, to cuddle. What happens is that, okay, we've gone through that. Now then, we're ready for sex. If she holds my hands, that means she's ready for sex. No. But she starts to notice that. She starts to notice that every time you start to get a little touchy, it's because you want to jump in the sack. And then she starts to connect dots. Like, wait a minute. The only reason you want to act a little romantic is when you want sex. You're just using me. You don't love me. You just want my body. And I guarantee you that's what happens. Because and we'll talk about this in the next session, we're wired differently. But they need to know that you love them, would honor them, would respect them if you never had sex. And you say, man, I can't imagine that. There may come a day. And if we all live long enough, that day will come. And the question is, will you still love your wife? Will you still hold her and touch her? Will you still cuddle her? Because that's important. Giving honor unto the wife. So we're to live with it. Basically what this verse is saying, we're to be a student of our wife. To be a student, you have to know about her. You have to learn about her. We went back for a class reunion with my wife. I wanted to go to that reunion. I wanted to see the people. I wanted to hear their stories about her. Because that helped me learn about her. When I was dating my wife, she has a brother that talks. And I would go purposely an hour before our date so I could sit with him. And I would ask open-ended questions. Tell me about how it was to be raised with. And I'd list all individually. And that would be a 40-minute monologue. Now, I had to understand, I had to temper that because that was his perspective of it. But that allowed me to learn more about her. Because if I'm going to love her and I'm going to honor her, I've got to do that. Giving honor to the wife. Did you know your wife's a treasure given by God? 3 verses there. Whoever finds a wife finds a good thing and obtained favor of the Lord. Houses and riches are the inheritance of fathers, and a prudent wife is from the Lord. Proverbs 31:10. Who can find a virtuous woman, for her price is far above rubies? Your wife's a treasure. God gave that treasure to you. And one day, you and I will stand before God, give account of how we treated the treasure that He gave us. Absolutely. You need to know it, you need to realize it, you need to believe it, and you need to behave in that way. Now, assign her a place of honor by your actions. You know, the interesting thing about expectations going into a marriage, they're completely different. A husband goes into marriage with expectations. Okay, I dated, I opened doors, I did all of these things, but when we're married, I won't have to do these things. It's sort of like shoot them, bag them, bring them home. Now, we don't have to do that anymore. Do you know what a wife's expectations are? He did this for me before we were married. Just imagine how much more He's going to do for me when we're married. Do you think a possibility of some conflicting expectations there? Absolutely. Think about that. Giving her a place of honor. You know, how you treat something indicates how much value you give to something. This was a picture I took years ago. But this was a new vehicle at the time. Where did they park that puppy? On the backside of the Walmart parking lot. Why? Because it was new and they didn't want any dings in it by people opening the door and didn't want shopping carts scraped into it. So how does that work with your wife? You speak good and loving words to and about her. Let me give you a sure way to encourage your wife with loving words. If you have a mother-in-law still living, you wait until your wife is not there and you talk to your mother-in-law and you tell her what an awesome wife you have and daughter she has. There is no mother-in-law that can keep that to herself. She will go straight to your wife and tell you. I'm not saying that you're hypocritical and you manipulate, but tell them what you think. Give those words. You tell her often. Do kind things for her in your manners, in your courtesy, in the unexpected things. Express thankfulness and appreciation verbally. Let me give you an illustration of that. I worked for Entergy Corporation for 30 years. In one of my assignments, I had all the engineering and operations from Little Rock, Arkansas down to Alexandria, Louisiana. And I had a construction, he was called an area line supervisor at the time, that worked for me. And he had construction crews under him. Now he was an older gentleman, and at that time the way you raised up through the ranks is you had to be the meanest, the strongest as a lineman to get to that job. And so he was an excellent employee. I mean, he loved overtime. He loved call-outs. He would work anytime you needed him. He was there. And so he took a lot of time with the job. And he had a hobby of fishing. He was a big bass fisherman, and he would, bass boat, plethora of rods and all of that. And so when he wasn't working, he was fishing. Well, this went on for a number of years. And he came home one day and his wife said, "I've had enough. I'm out of here." And of course he was shocked. Like, what do you mean? I provide a good living? We've had kids and the kids are doing well. And basically she said, "You have been married to the job and you've been married to fishing." So he said, "I tell you what, I will sell my bass boat. I'll get rid of all the rods." Bottom line, it was too late. She left. A number of years later, he remarried. The thing about a mistake, folks, is don't waste a good mistake. You've already paid for it, so learn from it. And so, after they'd been married a year or so, he went into the office and had the secretary there help him, and he printed out a big banner that said, "Judy, I love you," his wife. And so on Valentine's Day, he drove across town where she worked, took 2 survey stakes, put that in her parking place, and she drove up. By the way, if you want to impress your wife, if she works, send her flowers at work. She not only wants to feel you love her. Now, your wife may be a little different, but most wives, they want other people to see how much you love them. They need that. Well, the thing about the story is that this was the same town where the work center was. That didn't take long for the news to get across town to the work center, and he was called PW'd and everything else. But you know what? He didn't care, because he had lost a wife because of inattention, and he was not going to lose again. So the point is, we honor by our actions, we honor by our words every day. Express it verbally. Ask God's blessings for her. And then this edifying, how do we do that? It begins in your thought life. What does Philippians 4 say? Basically it says, think about the good things. There's good things, there's bad things. You're going to find whatever you're looking for. So with your wife, look for the positives. They're there. If you just look for the negatives, guess what? That's what you're going to find. Look for the positives. Praise and compliments. She needs that. Proverbs 31:28 says, her children rise up and call her blessed, and her husband also, and he praiseth her. Many daughters have done virtuously, but thou excellest them all. If you don't remember what a compliment would be like, tell them, you're the best. God gave you to me. You're the best thing that ever happened to me. They need that. Cheer, support, and encourage her. There's an interesting verse in Deuteronomy 24:5. When a man has taken a new wife, he shall not go to war, neither shall he be charged with any business, but he shall be free at home 1 year, and shall cheer up his wife which he hath taken. Strange verse, isn't it? But for a year. You say, wow, a year-long honeymoon, sex every day. That's not what it means. What it means is cheer up your wife. In other words, learn about her. Encourage her. Make her feel special. As unto the weaker, more delicate vessel, be sensitive to her problems. Her problem is your problem, or soon will be. Now, I'm going to give you a principle that is probably the most difficult principle for me to apply. And it may be for you. Because what tends to happen is how many times in your ministry and on your job do people come to you just to share? If they just to share a problem with you, what do they want? Want you to fix it. So when your wife starts to tell you about her problems, what do you have a tendency to do? I'm going to fix it for you. Let me tell you this. I can give you some horrible experiences with that. I can remember coming home and being met by my wife and got a problem. I said, well, okay. She had a problem on the job. Do this, this, and this. And she got really quiet. And I thought, she is awed by my wisdom. She was awed okay, but it wasn't my wisdom. It was like, you insensitive jerk. How can you even imagine that your 3 stupid little steps will fix all of my problems? And I found out later that, that was not appreciated. The point is this, more than anything else. Now, there's times when your wife has a problem, she wants it fixed, but more than any other thing else, what she wants is, do you care? Do you care? Here's what you can do. You care. Ask how she feels. Ask open-ended questions. Listen to what she says, and then empathize. You tell her what you think she feels. Now, you notice all the touchy-feely things in that? But basically, she wants to know that you care about her problem. There's a fine line between a hero and a goat. But you can be a hero by just listening and caring how she feels. Now, I'm going to give you a test. Okay? This is your boat. This is your car. This is your wife. All right? Your boat, your car, your wife. I want you to tell me the first thing, when you arrive on the scene, first words out of your mouth.
I kind of had that situation, but when the folks wife looked at the car.
So what are you going to say when you get there?
Are you okay?
David's got it. Are you okay? Why? I've been through something similar to this before too. Because, obviously she's okay. She's standing there, right? You're wondering, how did this happen? And you're already thinking about, how are we going to get this back up on dry ground? But I can guarantee you what she's thinking is, do you care about me? Do you care about me? Do you care more about cars, boats, and everything else than you care about me? I can tell you the correct question is, baby, are you okay? That's not natural. That's not normal. But you better understand, if you're going to love her like Christ loved the church. Now look at this. This verse ends up with, that your prayers be not hindered. What does that mean? This is not God's suggestion, it's His command. Your fellowship with God's at stake. We're not talking salvation, we're talking fellowship with God. You cannot Do you know who you're married to? Do you know who your father-in-law is? God is your father-in-law. And so He cares how you treat His daughter. So think about that. Now, finishing up, you love her in deeds. 1 John 3:18 talks about don't love in words but love in deeds. 1 Corinthians then talks about all of these different ways that we love. Love is patient, it's kind, it's generous, has humility, politeness, unselfishness. It talks about graciousness. Now, what's graciousness? Graciousness is treating people better than they deserve to be treated. Cut them some slack, give them some grace. Look at this picture. Anything unusual there?
Is that a toilet?
Steps.
Off of the back end of the toilet.
Sort of looks like that, doesn't it? Let me tell you the story. This is Dunlith Plantation in Natchez, Mississippi. And what happened was there was a planter that built a big home, was going to build a big home for his wife. And she wanted the home built in a Georgian style, which meant that it's sort of symmetrical. And she wanted a big fireplace on either end of the house. And so that's what he built. Lightning struck one of those fireplaces and burned the house down. And so, when they rebuilt, he left these steps of the old house as a reminder that I told you so. I told you we didn't want to build a house with the fireplaces like that. So any windows on the front of that house, when you look out, you see those steps. That is not extending grace. So extend grace to your wife, even if it's her fault. Then sincerity and endurance. And we could go through and talk about practical ways that you do that. But the point is, guys, this is how you love your wife. It's not just in word. You do use words. You verbally affirm her. And I would suggest to you, if you haven't ever read the book, The 5 Love Languages, that you read that and find out what the love language for your wife is. Because I can guarantee you that makes a difference. So, that's all you have to do, is love your wife as Christ loved the church. So think about that, pray about it, and it's an everyday event of loving your wife. Okay, we're going to finish up here, 9:51, so we're a minute over. And we'll come back in here and talk about sex. You're dismissed. Take a break.